There we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest Google Hangout panel with OpenCanada.org and the Canadian International Council. My name is Eva Salinas. I'm the managing editor here, and I am thrilled to welcome three great panelists to discuss an issue we felt needed more debate, discussion, more attention here in Canada and online. This is centered around the disappearance, of course, of 43 students from Guerrero, Mexico, on September 26th. Their disappearance has prompted a wave of protest in Mexico, likely the largest wave of protests seen since 2006, when a militarized drug war began in the country. Last week, on the anniversary of the Mexican Revolution, protests reached a peak. There's been a lot of pressure as a consequence on President Enrique Peña Nieto, and we'll get to one of our panelists on what he's been announcing this week in terms of whether he can make change in responding to that protest. I do want to point out that this is the final edition in a series we hosted online called Border Check this month. The series was looking at how we redefine the concept of borders, what separates us from our neighbor, what connects us, especially given the state of technology and security today. Many of us are wondering if what's happening in Mexico right now is, in fact, a turning point, and considering Canada and the U.S. are so often considered close economic allies, we're wondering where do we fit into this picture. So let's dive right in. First, for those joining us online, welcome, and feel free to follow the conversation and send any questions on Twitter, for instance. Use the hashtag CICMexico. Let's get right to our panelists. So in Mexico City, we have David Agron. Welcome, David. David has lived in Mexico many years. He is from Canada originally, and he freelances for Maclean's Magazine, for ABC News, Fox, for USA Today, Christian Science Monitor, for lots of different outlets. So welcome, David.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Next, in Toronto, but from Mexico, we have Luis Horacio Najera. Luis was a longtime journalist in Mexico. He covered crime, drug-related crime, but also the disappearance of women from Ciudad Juarez for Mexico, one of its largest media outlets, La Reforma. And now Luis is with us in Toronto. He is a visiting fellow at the University of Toronto. Welcome, Luis.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
And last but not least, we have Marina Jimenez, who is the former president of the Canadian Council for the Americas, also a longtime journalist. She has covered several elections in Mexico, often for the Globe and Mail. Welcome, Marina.
Thank you, Eva.
So I want to go to you, David, first. Let's start with an update on what's happened over the past 3 months since the disappearance of the students, especially that crime has escalated over so many years, and there have been protests. Why has this one struck a nerve?
That's the interesting question. Over the last 3 months, you have to take it back that Enrique Peña Nieto came to office 2 years ago, December 1st, 2012. He promised to implement an agenda of structural reforms, a lot of which had been stalled in Congress, in part opposition parties, of which his Institutional Revolutionary Party was one, had opposed them. And he'd achieved 11 major reforms in 2 years. So so if you go back to 3 months ago, he was giving his annual informe, which was effective a State of the Nation address, and it was a very triumphant tone that he struck. He had achieved all these reforms. Now the idea is these reforms are in areas like energy, which was somewhat of a taboo topic in Mexico for a long time, telecommunications, which was meant to break up some of the dominance of Carlos Slim, education, which loosened some of the grip, was meant to loosen some of the grip that the unions had over hiring and firing, among other things, bringing in teacher evaluations. So he was very triumphant in saying that now is the time to start implementing these reforms and doing them well. And basically, crime had not been on his. He had not spoken a lot of crime, but it's almost as if that was something that former President Felipe Calderón spoke a lot during his time. That was something he a topic he took up and promoted hard, and had a lot of frustration with. Peña Nieto was trying to change, in a lot of ways, change the image of the country, change it, separate his administration from the administration previously, and then suddenly these 43 students disappear, and then it seemed like at first in Mexico it was big news, but the outrage struck when it came to light that the students were likely kidnapped by the police and turned over to organized crime, and it was being done allegedly at the behest of a small town mayor in Iguala, which is about 200 kilometers south of Mexico City. And just from that moment, people started protesting, and I think Peña Nieto at first didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. And it appears he was caught very flat-footed because he had not been speaking a lot about security issues. It seemed like, and when he did speak about it, it was to say that there had perhaps been some improvements. The homicide rate has gone down, or something to that effect. So suddenly, Peña Nieto had to start coming out and giving a response, and it just didn't strike. His response just didn't resonate with the population. And so ever since then, I think people have been protesting, and it's why I think in part people feel personally, I think people feel threatened. People have gone from seeing organized crime as just being some menace in a lot of municipalities to actually being in the system, being a partner in power, being a partner in government, and that's got people frightened. And I think that has to be said as well, is that a part of what's driving this as well is that perceptions of crime had gone up. The National Statistics Institute had done polling in its crime perception surveys showing this. And also, Peña Nieto's reform agenda, while popular abroad with international investors and analysts, really wasn't that popular at home. And I think a lot of people just had a lot of latent discontent with Peña Nieto, and that's coming to the surface now.
Right, and I want to get to his response also in a minute, but Luis, from someone who you came to Canada in 2008, so it's been a few years now, but obviously where you were before in the north, this fear, these risks, you felt them personally. So when you look at the protest happening now, the outrage happening now, do you see it as different than 5 years ago or a year ago? Do you see this as when the popular saying "Ya me cansé" right now? Is there more of Mexican society saying enough is enough right now?
Well, I think we have to, this particular issue, we have to divide it in two. First, as David said, this fear, it's very interesting. In order to understand better this situation, we have to understand that Mexico is to some extent divided. You have the southern Mexico, central Mexico, and northern Mexico. In northern Mexico, the conditions are completely different in many, many ways. And one of these ways is, for instance, David says, well, people is fearing of the police. Well, if you go to northern Mexico, this is a permanent condition. I mean, because the border is there, so corruption is rampant. So this is a permanent condition of fear at northern Mexico. So now, what's happening, I think the big difference now is pretty much social media. This interaction between people, it's bringing a new element to this complex scenario in Mexico. Now people is organizing, people is tweeting, is doing Facebook, and I think at the end, that's the main difference now. That people is, to some extent, and I put quotation marks on that, is more engaged with quotation marks. Now, again, usually if you see the Mexico's history, southern and central Mexico is more engaged in social activism. Since the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, you can see more of these actions. Northern Mexico is different. However, that not necessarily mean that this is they have this, they live in this permanent condition of fear because of organized crime. Now, if you remember, like 6 years ago, the war on drugs was pretty much on northern Mexico. Now, spread all over the country. Now this brought a new dynamic in terms of security and social interaction even among the community.
Well, you raise an interesting point around social media, because if you have, I'm thinking, for instance, outside of the country, if you follow a lot of people from Mexico, yeah, you're going to feel that movement represented even online. But for Canadians, even though we have access to news from all over the world, we have access to, we're able to follow people from Mexico. There is this question whether there's a disconnect, and we did have one comment come through online from Louis Palou, who's if you know him, a well-known photojournalist and who has covered Mexico, and his comment was that most Canadians see Mexico for vacation and still have no clue of the connection Canada has to the drug war, to the drugs on the street in Canada and where they come from. Marina, do you feel there's a disconnect there between, say, the economic or tourist interests from Canada and everything else that's going on in Mexico? And if there is a disconnect, where does that come from? From government policy, from cultural difference, from a lack of media interest? What do you think?
Well, Eva, you raise a really good point, and I would have to say that all those factors are in there. There's definitely a disconnect, and there definitely there isn't the coverage that there should be, given that it's our #3 trading partner. 1.9 Canadians go to Mexico every year to vacation, and we do billions of dollars of trade and investment with Mexico, and it's one of our NAFTA partners. Why that is, I guess it's multifactorial. First of all, you're right, there's no media, there's no Canadian media based there permanently. The Globe and Mail did finally reopen their bureau there, but they placed it in Rio. There just isn't, I think Canadians typically look to Europe, and the Globe and Mail, for instance, does have bureaus in for example, Moscow and in Rome, but and so that we look to Europe, and we typically have been a bit of a laggard on our engagement in Latin America. That being said, at the political level, after Afghanistan, the Harper government has long said that the Americas is our #2 foreign policy priority. And in fact, there have been a lot of high-level visits there. The Prime Minister himself led a trade mission there last, I think it was February or March, and I asked you to participate in that trade mission, and you really got the sense there's a huge amount going on that level. We have a huge embassy there. We have 600 Scotia Bank outlets. We have, I think it's 500 mines that are operational in Mexico. So there's a lot going on, and it's just for some reason we don't really connect in terms of our cultural diplomatic interest in the country, and that unfortunately leads to a lack of media coverage as well. I've been shocked that this story has not been picked up, and I think it will be, though. I think it will be as it unfolds.
Mm-hmm. David, you published, or Maclean's published a great feature by you just last week. Have you seen a difference, for instance, in Canadian media interest versus American? Mexico's this interesting, it's part of Latin America, but it's also part of North America. So it's closer than when we send freelancers or reporters to West Africa or to cover protests in Ukraine or Egypt. And yet they're not getting sent.
No, it's just under a 5-hour flight from Mexico City to Toronto. So only one time zone difference. So it's not a question of distance. I recall going to I've been to Guerrero State 3 times now since this tragedy unfolded. Twice to Iguala, once to the school in the state capital Chilpancingo, and also went to Acapulco last weekend, and I have continually got bumped into media from all over the world. I went with a Dutch journalist on one trip. I bumped into journalists from France, from Le Monde, from El País, all the major U.S. publications. I went down with a pair of journalists from the Wall Street Journal. We shared a ride. It's been covered extensively by everyone, by a lot of people worldwide. I went to a briefing last night at the President's office. Again, same thing. 16 foreign press in there on a sort of a last-minute meeting with the Chief of Staff. So, it just seems like everybody is on it. Maybe not necessarily Canadians, but
Give me an idea.
I think if nothing else, just the scope of the human tragedy of this is what's pulling people in, and just the sense of disgust that it was just done apparently for such frivolous reasons. Students going to protest a political event in Iguala. So I think that's what's captured people. So
give me an idea at a presser like the one you went to last night, or perhaps the freelancer community that you know in Mexico City. How many American reporters are there compared to Canadian? I mean, do you know all the Canadians there?
Sure. Yeah, I know of 2 other Canadians. Look, I mean, my main, as a journalist, my main string, as we call it in the industry, is USA Today. That's how I used to have to get what's called an anuencia, a permit from the Interior Ministry in order to get a journalist visa, and I got that through USA Today. Basically, I feel like there's almost a dearth of freelancers in Mexico right now. I think in part is because some of them have been given jobs by bureaus. It's the number is a lot larger. Just I can't even put a number on it. It's almost everyone I know is American, is either American or British. A good number of British. Canadian, pretty small number.
Luis, you have refugee status. You received that status in 2010, I believe, after you arrived in Canada. So you must, be sharing your story or speaking to people quite often in Canada, and I would assume, get their impressions on whether they were aware of the risks. You're a journalist, so as we know, especially northern Mexico, there's a lot of risks for journalists, but for everyone in northern Mexico. Did you find that Canadians are aware of the situation? And then following that, is there any risk of over-sensationalizing it as well? I mean, of making it seem like all of Mexico is dangerous?
Well, interesting question. Well, recently, Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, an NGO here in Canada oriented to support free expression and press freedom, they did some research on the amount of information that has been published, particularly about war on drugs in Canadian media. And they found that in 9 years, the Globe and Mail was the largest producer of content about the war on drugs, but only 22 notes in 9 years, 22. And there's another media like Toronto Star or the other major news media companies here, but it's the amount is significantly lower. So that gives you an idea of that, as has been discussed here, that there's this real interest. Now, as a consequence of that, my theory is that because of this almost invisible presence of information about Mexico, there's this sense of awareness. There's no. I think there's a lack of awareness among the Canadian community of what's happening in Mexico. Therefore, when cases like mine or other cases from people who came to Canada looking for refugee, they don't have really a clear sense of what's happening there. So sometimes they don't trust, sometimes they don't think it is possible, because they say, well, I mean, I've been in Cancun and it's beautiful. I never saw any, I don't know, soldier, or how can it be possible that you came from such a wonderful country? Well, that's unfortunately the situation. So that's a big issue that I don't know to what extent needs to be addressed properly, because and jumping into a little bit into the previous comments, I think probably a key component here is language. Mexicans speak Spanish, Canadians speak English, so there's no that cultural / language connection between what's happening in Mexico and what's happening in Canada. Probably if you go to Zambia or any other place in Africa, probably where they speak English, there's a better understanding of the situation, or it's easier for a journalist going there and work and going back, and but if you go to Mexico, it's different. As you said, it's North America while it's Latin America.
Yeah.
So I think it's complex.
Mm-hmm. Canada and Mexico did celebrate 70 years of bilateral relations this year. It's 20 years since NAFTA began. There's been a lot of reinforcing of the economic relationship between the two countries. But of course, there's been this one kind of elephant in the room since 2009, and that's the visa that's been imposed on Mexicans coming to Canada. There's been some expectations that from the Mexican side that visa would be lifted. It has not. Does this signal, and Marina, I guess this is a question for you, because especially you being on that state visit earlier this year, does it signal really Canada's priorities being economic in terms of the visa restricting certain kinds of Mexicans from coming to Canada, but allowing, of course, trade and business to continue?
Yeah, well, I think the visa issue is very complicated, and certainly expectations were raised before the Prime Minister's trip earlier this year that there would be something happening there, partly because the reason the visa was imposed in 2009 was because Mexico had become our #1 source country for refugee claimants. I think it was something like 9,000 people. If you look at the stats, I think in 2012 it had gone down to 300, partly, of course, because the visa was imposed, but also because we have substantively changed our refugee determination system and made it tougher in many ways and made removals more of a priority. So there was the expectation that something would change. And the Mexicans put on a very good show and were extremely hospitable. And on the Canadian side, it wasn't just the Prime Minister that went, it was 3 ministers, it was an MP, it was a trade mission. The embassy put on round tables and was really promoting different, energy reform and various other sectors, setting up tables for business people to make connections in Mexico. So I think the Mexicans' hopes were dashed in that sense, and they were expecting something to happen. And the Prime Minister did make comments about having to balance security with, with diplomacy. But the truth is that our visa is difficult to get, and it doesn't deter. It deters actually business people just as much as international students and others. It just, so it really is a little bit a case of the requirements of the visa. And I think there was some hope there'd be some reforms there. Maybe there will be to come. And certainly the number of Mexicans visiting Canada as tourists, which is our tourist dollars, has gone down as well, while the numbers of Canadians visiting Mexico just continues to rise. So I do think that, but having said that, the relationship's a complex one, and it's not just about the visa that's in there, but there's so many other files going on, and there's so much more engagement than on just that issue, though it is an important one.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just jump in. What's the shame? The shame with the visas. When I came to Mexico in 2005, one thing that I recall is just how many people, younger Mexicans, Canada had become a very cool destination to go, especially for studying abroad, studying English courses. They could go and study for up to 6 months. Didn't need to get a visa. There were tons of. I continually meet, Mexicans under the age of 30, 35 who, spent some time studying in Canada. It became a very common thing for people in the middle and upper classes to do. I don't know if Canada is really viewed as cool by a lot in the world, but it certainly was in Mexico. And the shame of what the visa did is it just really, it just curbed that. It just changed some of the perceptions of the country. Hurt tourism, which had been growing. The Mexicans that do travel tend to be Mexicans that have the means to do so, and they spend. Mexicans, it tends to be common in a lot of Latin America people, they like to shop abroad. There's a reason there's so many large outlet malls on the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexico border. So and the visa is just, from anyone I've spoken with, just a total hassle to get and expensive. So, I've known people who have just said, I'm not going to do this, and there's others who, out of principle, just say, I find this insulting and I won't go there. So it's a shame the way it's played out.
Luisa, had there been a visa imposed when you were coming to Canada, would you have been able to come to Canada as easily as you did?
No, I have to make my choice. my decision from one night to another. So I couldn't, because I probably didn't have enough time to go and apply for, visa and so on. And I heard that the process is kind of complex. And I think you have to submit documents through mail to the embassy if you don't have a consulate or an embassy nearby. Of course, it's different. Now, I think something that we also need to understand, I mean, of course, this is a very complex, extremely complex issue. And as you said, we have to, or the government has to balance security and diplomacy. Unfortunately, there's also as these there's a reasoning, there's a logic of this, and unfortunately, there's people who indeed abuse from of the system, as they mentioned, people who come to study and they found easy jobs and they can go and work cash. Unfortunately, that creates a problem, again, it's another layer in a huge complex problem that is really hard to solve easily, to say, okay, this is right and this is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it speaks to a whole, I mean, we could have a whole debate on the changing definition of what is a refugee. Mexico's also been declared a designate country in 2013, which means it's a safe country for refugees, which means it's a country that doesn't produce refugees. I mean, that's a designation that the Canadian government assigned, right? Put Mexico on that list, which may serve several purposes. But anyhow, that is a larger debate, but I'm glad we did touch on it. I want to go lastly just to what's happening next. Following especially the large protest last week, the president did hold, I believe, the press conference yesterday to announce some security reforms. There's been pressure to make change. As you said, David, he just even a few months ago, at least internationally, was seen as a president who was making change very quickly. He passed through the reforms, especially the energy reforms, very quickly. He's been praised for those energy reforms from outside of Mexico. I'm not sure if this will change how he's perceived outside of Mexico, but how has it changed his focus, and what did he announce yesterday?
Yeah, the focus is back on security. Peña Nieto came out with a plan to, as you said, reestablish the rule of law. That's something that's been long absent in Mexico. He came out with a large list of proposals, some of which, a large part of which actually were put forward by former President Felipe Calderón. Things such as what they call mando único. You have, instead of having 1,800 municipal police forces, many of which are questioned and possibly corrupted, you now would have 32 state police forces with a single commander on the top. That's meant to make infiltration by organized crime much more difficult. There's what they say, a plan that they copied from Italy, which was to be able to dissolve municipalities, cases that are possibly corrupted by organized crime. They can go in and clean them up as they want, as they need to. National ID, new 911 will come to Mexico as a long talked about proposal. Strengthening of human rights initiatives. It's a long list of 10 reforms that will go to Congress. There was also going to spend a lot of money to develop southern Mexico, which I'm not sure that's sort of drawn a lot of questions. Southern Mexico, of course, is quite underdeveloped in comparison to the north. What you're finding right now is just from glancing at social media, columnists, just talking with people since yesterday, is skepticism. I think a lot of people are wondering why now. Why this older program, and also, is he the right person to do it? This had not been his issue, but it has become his issue now. I'm not sure he has the political capital to do this like he did before. I mean, he was able to get the political party, to bargain with the political parties to get them to go along with the other reforms that he had done. I'm not sure there's the will to do that now. And the other problem in Mexico right now too is that all political parties are questioned and viewed as, I'll say this politely, somehow, I'll say corrupted. I mean, the mayor of Iguala, where this tragedy happened, belonged to the main left-wing party, the PRD. The National Action Party has been known for its management of small-time, the way it manages giving out municipal contracts, almost sort of like politicians taking a cut of what, and directing business to favorable firms, the PRI. You know, Peña Nieto's party, there are governors who are highly questioned. So I don't see anyone in the political system that has, or anyone really outside the political system that has the moral authority to come in and start leading any sort of major change in Mexico. I think change will come from the society itself, if it comes at all.
And Marina, do you feel that attention on this event Canadians might turn to Mexico to be more interested in politics? Should we be? What do you think?
Absolutely we should be. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is our #3 trade partner. It's our neighbor. It's our NAFTA partner. We vacation there. We trade there. And definitely there should be more engagement. There is sort of official engagement, but there doesn't seem to be societal engagement, partly because, to Luis's point, we're not a Latin society the way the U.S. is. We only have 1 million people who speak Spanish in Canada. But you know what? We still engage with China, we engage with Moscow, we engage in other countries, and I really think that. And the other thing to remember is, of course, with the drug problem and the crime problem, we're of course the consumers up in North America, so we're tied to that problem in that sense, and we're part of the reason for the big drug market. So I definitely we should be more engaged.
Mm-hmm. I want to give the last word to Luis. When you see the protests and the outrage and the movement, does that give you hope for some kind of change? Does that feel different to you? Do you think this is a turning point?
It is a turning point in terms of how society is organizing through social media, again, this cyber activism. But I don't see like an emerging power like Arab Spring or something like that to change the situation. No. I think the particular Latin American governments have been, and we can see this in Brazil, Venezuela, even in Colombia, that the governments they have some sort of flexibility to social, to the society, to, okay, you can go, you can protest, you can do up to some point. But at the end, the government decided where to set the line. And for instance, in Mexico, there has been some reforms on leading to criminalizing some sorts the use of internet to some purposes, the use of social media. Some of these reforms have been approved, others not. So I don't think that this is going to change anything. Now, the other issue that is very interesting now is this paternalistic view of the government, which comes back to the old PRI for the 60s, the 50s, this paternalistic view of, okay, I'm going to take on, if you can handle your problems, I'm going to be there to solve your problems. These new reforms of President Peña Nieto is as David mentioned, they're going to take control of municipal forces, but they're going to take control in public services even. And they just said public services. It's not only police. They can run the whole system. So I don't see something in the future, the close future, something that may change the situation in Mexico.
Well, hopefully it's an ongoing conversation, and certainly one we'll be having at opencanada.org. But I do want to thank the three of you for joining us today to discuss this, and we'll be looking forward to further coverage out of Mexico and Canada on the issue. So thanks to David Agron, Marina Jimenez, and Luis Horacio Najera. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Ciao.
Bye.